Dr. Machila, you're still under oath?
Yes, Commissioner.
Commissioners, we're at paragraph 434, but I'm not going to get Dr. Majila to continue at this point in time because I'm going to ask him some questions about certain evidence that he's given up to this point in time. So, Dr. Majila, if I can take you back to paragraph 431. You said that you phoned Matseko Takubong of the ESG team. What position did he occupy?
I think Matseko heads up the ESG team for listed investments.
And Candace Abrams, she was, as we've heard,
At that time, I think it was acting, her position is Senior Manager Enterprise-Wide Risk Management.
Okay. And Winnie Chedi was the acting executive head for legal, is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
Now, you've been provided, before we get to that, you say that you were assured by each of those individuals that although the reports from the individual departments hadn't yet been prepared and printed, they'd all been concluded and they recommended the conclusion of the deal. Is that correct?
That's correct, Commissioner.
Now, you've been provided with a copy of a report by the Internal Audit Department on this transaction, which report is dated December 2018. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If I can refer you to paragraph page 46 of that report.
Is that document part of the two files that we have or not?
I'm not sure what's in your files, Commissioner, because we haven't received any files, but this was given to us yesterday. So
I'm talking about the files that contain the DD annexures, right?
No, it's not part of those files. This is a document which was given to us by the Evans leaders yesterday.
Do we have it?
Mr. Commissioner, it has been provided to the Commission, and Mr. Namagovan was here to present it. It was given to the Commission, but on a different date.
Is that a 90-page one? The one?
Yeah, about
the
96.
The long one. Yeah, we have seen it before. Yeah,
that's correct.
Whether we can remember it, that is another story. But we have seen it. The audit report. Yeah,
that is correct.
The large, thick report.
That's written confidential across it.
That is correct, Mr. Commissioner.
Not just confidential, strictly private and confidential. If I can refer you to page 46 of that paragraph 10.2.14, this is Mr. Victor Siani.
Sorry, can you just give us the reference again?
Page 46, paragraph 10.2.14. This is Mr. Victor Siani who's being interviewed here, and what is recorded at this particular paragraph is upon discussions with Victor on 12th December 2018, he indicated that although risk, ESG and legal reports were only completed after the subscription was signed, he had held discussions with the team so as to satisfy himself that there were no major concerns and issues when the subscription was signed. And you say in this paragraph that we're dealing with 431, you say that you also phoned these people to find out whether there was anything adverse in the reports that were being prepared by them, which would have prevented the conclusion of the AO transaction.
That's correct. If my memory serves me well, there was that confirmation from them.
Now, what's interesting in this internal audit report at page 52 paragraph 10.2.46. Is that it? Sorry, 10.45, 10.2.45, is that it says internal audit held discussions with Chifango on 13 December 2017 and Candace, that must be Candace Abrams, on 12th December 2017, and they also noted that they were not called by anyone on or before December 2017 about the contents of the risk DD report. Now, you say that you in fact contacted Candace on the 13th of December 2017. She denies it. What do you say about that?
I think this in my view, Commissioner, points towards a very difficult environment at the PIC. You know, from what I heard is that, you know, people were scared and they had to comply, or else they would be suspended as well, you know. So I remember sending Mr. Leboham Mulibatsi an SMS, you know, at some stage, or WhatsApp, just to chat to him to find out how he's doing. And he said to me, look, I mean, he's under huge pressure, you know, and he may be suspended. Suspended for having signed the subscription agreement for IU. And I said to him, but why is it so? I mean, I thought, you know, you had authority, and most importantly, I also had authority. That's why I co-signed with you to ensure that we share the responsibility on the basis of, you know, all work being done as far as we are concerned, you know. So why is that so? And he said to me, look, I'm just being put under pressure to comply. So I'm not surprised at a certain turnaround in some of the witnesses saying that they were never called or they didn't discuss with me, you know, and that's, you know, something that I've observed once I was out of that place, that most of people simply turn around, and even statements that were made here about the fact that I don't rule, I don't lead, I rule, and so on, you know, points towards that change in attitude because of fear and people trying to protect their position at all expenses. So I would have been the easiest, you know, to point fingers at, you know, for all of this.
Well, let me ask you this. If you hadn't spoken to these people from ESG Risk and Legal that you say you spoke to, how would you have known whether it was okay to go ahead with the AO deal or not?
It would have been difficult to do so, and the reports that are in this before, I mean, that were presented to us, you know, bears testimony to that there was no material findings as per what I was told, you know. So I wouldn't have guessed that that is the case without being told that there are no material issues raised in these reports.
And if you had received any adverse reports from these people that you contacted, would you have gone ahead and done the deal?
No, we wouldn't have done the deal. Unless there was a case of a strong mitigating strategy around such a risk, because we do take risk if it can be mitigated. But in this instance, if there's no mitigating strategy around it, we don't accept it, and therefore I wouldn't have done the risk. I mean, I would have done the deal.
Now, one of the people that you don't seem to have contacted, according to your statement, is the CFO, Ms. More, before the decision was made to sign the subscription form. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And can you explain to the commissioners why that is so?
Ms. Mori is almost in the similar situation as I am, because we rely on advice from the technical people. They are the ones who do the work and make recommendations to us. you know, so it wasn't necessary to ask her because she's not doing the technical work anyway. The technical work is done by the team.
But Dr. Machila, doesn't the delegation of authority require her approval beforehand, before a transaction is entered into?
That delegation it's applied in the form of a PMC meeting. That's where every one of us then has a view, has a voice to, you know, has a voice in the meeting.
Ms. Murray testified that the delegation of authority had subsequently been amended to provide for her exclusion as the CFO in respect of her approval beforehand for the conclusion of a transaction.
I think that's appropriate, because then it will really define the role that she plays in an investment cycle better. Because as it stands, she only is in a position to express her views in a PMC environment.
And those views would be based on what the substance, on the merits of the transaction, is that correct?
That's correct, which are then given by the technical teams, the different technical teams.
So if the technical teams were in favor of a transaction, has it ever been the situation that the CFO would then not be in favor of a transaction for some
I can't
reason?
recall that situation. Once they have a positive recommendation of a transaction, it's approved, almost approved.
But you say that subsequently that DOA has been amended to cater for that fact, and
That's
the
correct.
CFO's prior approval is no longer required.
That's correct, Commissioner.
Now, at paragraph 432, you quote the findings and recommendation regarding the AO transaction. At a forward PE of 16 times on management's earnings estimates, the AO transaction appears to be a reasonably attractive catalytic investment to stimulate significant transformation in the IC sector. Now, who performed the work to come to that conclusion?
This will be the investment team responsible for the investment, the technical team responsible for the investment.
And this multiple of 16 times and the financial information that has been reviewed in order to come to this particular conclusion, were you involved with that?
No, not at all. I was not involved in this, Commissioner.
And then it's recommended that the PMC listed approves the AO purchase at 43 Rand per share.
That's correct.
That was the information that was placed before you, certainly at the PMC meeting of the 20th of December, but that was the information to hand when you telephoned these various people.
Yes, and the subsequent subscription, signing of the subscription agreement.
Was there,
I mean the irrevocable undertaking.
where would this financial information have been derived from to come to these figures?
This is all derived from the pre-listing statement of IO.
And was there anything which made you doubt the veracity of that information?
No, because these PLSs are signed off by JC approved entities, signing off on both legal, technical, and other and legal issues, yes.
But let's just examine that for a moment, because
Sorry, just on clarity there, are you saying that all of these numbers were derived from the final PLS and not the draft PLS?
The draft PLS, but
The draft PLS?
Yes, but the final PLS and the draft PLS had very little differences.
But you didn't have the final PLS when you did the numbers?
Yes,
So this is based on the draft PLS?
that's correct.
Just another one here. You know, people from the PIC have come to the commission, and some have said the PIC doesn't pay for the value that it creates. The PIC doesn't pay for the value it creates. Can you explain to us what actually that means?
I thought they would have explained better than I do.
Yeah,
I'll find it.
you know these things. You know these things. And, let's hear it from the expert.
No, I don't want to venture into that, Commissioner. And I think it's about paying the fair price. That's what it is. And the fair price will be determined by the team to say this is more or less the fair price that we are prepared to pay.
Doesn't it mean that the PIC will pay for fair value, but it won't pay for the next value creation, in a sense that it will pay for the company as is, but it won't necessarily pay for the when it acquires other companies and grows and all that?
I guess
fair value versus blue sky and all that. I'm just trying to understand what they meant.
I think it depends on the sector that you are dealing with here. You know, there are certain sectors where, you know, assets or value is derived is easy to calculate. I mean, there are so-called widgets. I think that's the typical example that's used there about, you know, widgets. You know, these are things that are tangible, that you can count, quantify, and so the PIC says they will have to pay a fair price for that. But there are businesses where some of these things are not tangible because they are in contracts that are going to be realized into the future. So it becomes a guessing game, you know, and you just have to rely on certain metrics, you know, unfortunately, you know, like in IT or ICT. That's typical because some of these things are softwares, they are contracts, service contracts and so on, which are quite difficult to quantify. If you say what is the assets in the company, there's almost nothing. But there are contracts that bring value to the company that can be sort of estimated. And unfortunately, under those circumstances, if you take the asset base versus the value that you expect to be created, you know, that may be, if you want to pay for the assets only, there's no chance that you'll be able to pay. Nobody will sell you that. You know, if you take, I'm sure if NASPES was approaching the valuation of 10 cents along the lines of assets and so on, they wouldn't have put money in there because I think it was loss-making. The NAV was negative, and so there's something that drives this value.
Just to come in there, my take is a bit different. What I'm asking is, this IO is a new company, and you are basing that 16 PE on companies that exist, and it's an average of those companies' PEs and all that. It would appear that, and I don't want to argue the valuation here really, because I'm just asking for clarifications, but it would appear that a 16 PE on a new company that is still has to prove that it can buy other companies, acquire companies, and things can go wrong, as you saw that when the EcoBank tried to acquire the other bank, I mean, things went wrong. And I don't want to talk much about it, but to put a 16 PE on a new company and to equate it with the existing companies that have been growing for 16, 20% per annum, do you think it's correct?
Unfortunately, global standard tells me that that is the case. I mean, we may be paying cheap. You know, I think it was Jumia not long ago, owned by MTN, that listed in New York, making losses. It was up 60% in no time. You know, so probably we are still using the, you know, valuation methodologies that are applicable to certain sectors, whilst we are in a different environment altogether. You know, the so-called fourth industrial revolution, things are measured differently. So,
yeah. Let's leave it there, and then we can come again to it. The next one is on the 4.3 billion. You know, that is the paragraph 432. Just to clarify something there. Whenever you see a valuation or a document say there's a valuation of we're gonna pay 4.3 billion rands, do you think about it? Do you ever say, can I get the supporting documentation, or do you, as a CEO, you wouldn't wanna look at that? When that valuation came, did you think about it?
yeah, we definitely get supporting documentation. In all of this, from the meetings that were cancelled, we do get information that explains how these valuations were arrived at and what are the assumptions and many other things. And in between, there will be meetings, sometimes with the team for updates where they are and so on, if they pick up any problems. So there's a fair amount of engagement. We don't just say, well, this is a value, therefore we sign off. No, you know, otherwise it would have not been necessary. It would have not been necessary for them to provide me with transaction documentation upfront, valuations,
so, yes.
and workings.
So you did look at it and say, okay, I'm pretty comfortable and I can sign. Is that
that's correct? But
okay.
It's mainly on their advice. They would say, we've tested this. This is an extreme. This is cheap. We think we are
Base
okay.
case is this.
Worst case, and then more or less where we should be.
Okay.
You know. So that information I do get. I do get.
All right. Thanks for now.
Thank you. Doctor, just to follow on from Commissioner Lidicha, I think the point is, though, that at the time that the subscription form was signed in this for the AO transaction, that documentation, that supporting documentation was not before you. Is that correct?
The valuations was already before me, and so I had all the information around valuation, which is a critical component of this, including the draft PLS.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we know that there were no material changes in the draft PLS from the final PLS regarding that financial information. Did the conclusion that the teams had come to, that they were comfortable in doing the AO transaction and the multiple that they used in order to value that particular transaction, did that look odd to you or out of kilter?
Not at all, Commissioner. You know, these are seasoned experts, if I were to put it that way, well qualified, well experienced, and they've proved that they definitely know what they're doing. Their outperformance speaks for itself in the equities. I think they presented here. You know, they've done exceptionally well.
Thank you, Doctor. Then if I can ask...
Just suffice to say that you can have a multiple, Dr. Dan, Dr. Machila, you can have a multiple based on a 16 PE, but there's the other element, because it's price and the earnings say it's R1 billion, 16 multiple, so the earnings would be R1 billion. The multiple is 16, so it means that the earnings are R1 billion, price to earnings. So there could be also issues in calculating the earnings of that, isn't it?
That's correct, yeah.
That the earnings could be stretched from a certain amount to 900 million to R1 billion.
That's right.
And then that's hence you get a price of, say, 16 billion divided by R1 billion of earnings, that gives you a 16 PE, isn't it?
Yes,
16 billion of price, the market cap, divided by the R1 billion of earnings, that's 16 PE.
Yeah.
But within that R1 billion of earnings, there could be many issues that go in there,
That's correct.
both
yeah.
on the revenue side, the margins, and the after-tax profits.
Yes.
All
yes.
right. Okay. Yeah.
There's a
We
lot
shall-
of assumption that has to...
Assumptions and
Yeah.
focus and all that.
Exactly.
Yes.
But you may have historical numbers
Sorry?
to base historical numbers
Yes.
to give you a sense of what is doable, and then forecast
Yes.
and work out, how reasonable that number is
Yeah,
going
yeah,
forward.
Yeah. We shall come to that,
Yeah,
but yeah,
because-
just to clarify that too, yeah.
Sorry, before you continue, I just want for clarity for myself, so I didn't mishear. If I understand you correctly, Dr. Machila, you're saying before you signed the irrevocable on the 13th of December, you had all the financial information that you required to make that decision.
This will be the valuation from the team. The only thing that was still being worked on was the ESG report, legal and risk, which
And you had that before the 13th?
Those were being finalized, and I was told that there are no material issues, because in an IPO, the biggest component of work is around valuation,
Sure.
which the team had concluded and happy with.
So you had
Yes.
the information sufficient for you to feel comfortable signing the irrevocable on 13th of December before
14th.
it goes to any process,
14th of December, yes.
right?
Yes.
So that was the first question.
I think we're also clear that, we're signing this because the team is happy that we can go ahead and transact. The fact that we couldn't get meetings and the deadline was just around the corner, that's when I step in to sign off with Mr. Mulibazi on the basis that this will be ratified at the next meeting of PMC.
Okay, no, that will come, and then just to indicate that obviously your council is taking you through these matters, but we're going to be coming back to all of them.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Doctor, if I can then ask you to carry on from paragraph 434, please.
I must address the allegation that I put pressure on my colleagues to do the transaction. Although there was pressure to meet the listing deadline, I have not put any pressure on anyone to make specific recommendation, including the valuation, to ensure that the deal worked. They all did that work independently and recommended the transaction as per all memos that served at all committees, including Standing Committee of Finance in Parliament. A meeting of PMC will be consisted, among others, of the following positions: the CEO, the CFO, the executive head listed investments, the executive head legal compliance, the executive head risk, executive head research, project development, executive head portfolio management and valuation representing ESG department, and various general managers. Of this position in the PMC, the recommendations of risk, PMV, which is ESG, legal, and deal team were basically determinative as to whether the transaction should be concluded or not. This fact was corroborated by Ms. Matsepo More in her statement to this commission. By the 14th and 15th December 2017, all due diligence processes and reports have been prepared and submitted as per appraisal report and annexures. It should be obvious by now that allegations that the due diligence process in the transaction was either not performed or was defective are totally unfounded. To the extent that the minute of the PMC meeting of 20th December reflects the legal and ESG teams performing a complete due diligence and providing feedback to the PMC LI, I agree with the explanation provided by Ms. Moore in paragraph 6.10.5 of her statement to the Commission. On 14th December 2017, Mr. Mulibati approached me with the IO subscription form in hand and asked me what we should do as the deadline was the next day. It was then impossible to organize another meeting of the PMC at such short notice. I tried to alleviate this difficulty by attempting to obtain approval for transaction via round-robin resolution of the relevant PMC members, but this was unsuccessful as they had already left on holiday. I had to make a judgment call on whether the PIC should conclude the IO transaction or not. Since the due diligence had been performed and did not indicate anything untoward with the transaction, and since the conclusion of the transaction was supported by those positions on the PMC which were critical to the approval of transactions, I suggested to Mr. Malibasi that he sign and I co-sign the subscription form, but subject to the understanding, which I also expressed to him, that I will request the PMC to regularize the transaction at the first available opportunity.
Dr. Majila, can I just stop you there? In this internal audit report dated December 2018, at page 12, paragraph 6.2.5, the internal auditor comes to the conclusion that in essence the transaction, referring to the AO transaction, was executed before PMC 1 and PMC 2 could have sight of it. Do you see that?
Yes, yes.
What is your comment on PMC 1 and PMC 2 having sight of this transaction, and what do you say about that conclusion?
I think, Commissioner, we explained PMC 1 and PMC 2 that these are just stages in the transaction and not different meetings, so to put it. And key people in the PMC in terms of decision making, as I said, or who is important in making sure that the decision is taken would be the transaction team, who would have worked on the transaction, they know it. ESG team, who we know was aware and worked on the document. ESG, legal, as well as risk. I think Mr. Siane does, attest to that in his statement, that he passed on information to this team to do work, and indeed they did work around this. So those are the key in terms of PMC and membership that are supposed to be aware of the transaction at any point in time.
So it appears that when the internal auditor finds that in essence the transaction was executed before PMC 1 and PMC 2 could have had sight of it, he seems to misunderstand what the PMC is all about and what PMC 1 and PMC 2 are.
That's what I pick up here in this document.
Then what I want to refer you to, Dr. Machila, in the same internal audit report, there is a issue raised in respect of the due diligence, two issues that are raised in respect of the due diligence at page 17. The first is that risk, there were still questions as at the 15th of December 2017, there were still questions that risk had raised with AO which were not answered yet including a request to get the 2017 audited financial statements of AO, and Risk did put it in their risk report that they had not received the audited financial statements of AO. I want to...
Mr. Rulofse, you know, we are at some disadvantage because we don't have the document.
I apologize, Mr. Commissioner. I thought that if my learned friends were going to use it, they would have placed it before you.
We do have, or we do have copies, but they're not before us because we didn't know that they were going to be referred to. We didn't bring them into the room. I think I've got one.
Can we organize to...
It's quite a large document, so we just want to check whether, Judge, we take one copy. One copy, okay.
What page were you referring to now so that we can let you go ahead and just look at it later?
It's page 17, Mr. Commissioner, paragraphs 6.8.1 and 6.8.2. I'm happy to wait, Commissioners, if you want to get the relevant document before yourselves. It can't take too long.
We're making notes. You can go ahead.
I'm indebted. Dr. Majila, I was pointing you to page 17, paragraph 6.8.1 and 6.8.2 of this internal audit report. And there were some issues which were raised. The first pertaining to outstanding information, which included audited financial statements of AO. What is your comment on whether audited financial statements of AO were necessary in order for Risk to come to a conclusion and recommendation about the AO transaction?
I think we spoke about the importance of the PLS, and that the PLS it's signed off by the JSC, and it's got very stringent requirements, including the right financials being approved by a technical firm or a financial or accounting firm to ensure that information is reliable, and legal and other aspects of the PLS are all signed off by JC approved firms to give comfort to any investor that they can use the information in the PLS. So there was no need for this requirements. For this request.
Sorry, I'm getting confused. You interchangeably use the draft and the PLS. At this point, were you working on the final PLS that the JSC approved? Whether there's differences or not is a separate question. The reliance being placed on a draft PLS is different from a reliance being placed on the PLS. Are you referring to a draft or to the PLS?
At this stage, we're referring to the draft PLS.
Then please can we use that terminology, because it is materially different in terms of the reliance issue, whether or not there are changes within it. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just another quick one. In terms of the final PLS, was it dropped at the PIC before disbursement and all that? I'm sure it should have been. Do you know?
Yes, as far as I know, it was delivered to the PIC.
And did people then check it? That is it too different to
Yes,
the draft?
that's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay.
But you made your decision to sign having the draft before you, or in your possession?
No, Commissioner. I was told that the final is not different, the final is not different from the draft, and therefore on that basis we could sign off because the numbers have not changed. The team was comfortable. So in other words, I signed on the basis of the final PLS.
When you say you were told, it means you didn't see it yourself.
Mr. Mlibatsi told me. He was the executive that actually brought the form to me. In fact, I remember we signed at reception because he was looking for me and he said to me, look, this is final now, we can sign off. You know.
Is it right to say a final PLS typically comes out a week or 2 or 3 even before the actual listing, isn't it? A final one.
I'm not sure about the timing, really. I can't. Yeah, I'm not sure about the timing.
But at least a week, maybe.
But
even.
it's normally in, you know.
Yeah, because I mean, you cannot sign that form generally before you get the final PLS.
That's right. Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, because the form is attached to the final.
To the
PLS.
final PLS. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So typically the form would come from inside the PLS.
Yeah, you actually tear it off.
You tear it off, and it's a final PLS.
That's correct.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry, on this, I just really am a bit concerned about this assumption that you've now got the final in front of you at the time that you sign and you have the discussion on the 13th of December. Mr. Malabatsi says in his testimony that they only had the draft listing statement due to time pressures on the team. The tight timelines to meet the deadline of 15th of December was a concern as the investment proposal had not yet been to the PMC. In his discussions with you on the 13th of December, where he was told that the IPO date cannot be moved and instructed that the team keep the original transaction timelines. So there you indicate that you have had discussions with the heads of the different entities as you've outlined. At what point did you get, Mr. Malabatsi, at what point in those dates between the 13th and the 20th did the PLS final statement come before you or whoever, or Mr. Malabatsi, that you can say we saw the final PLS?
My understanding is that Mr. Malabatsi brought the final form with him on the 14th for signature. That's when I said to him, that's fine because the work has been done, we can sign off.
Can we please get clarity on that, Edward Mahape, because if we need be, check with Mr. Malabatsi, because this is quite critical to the decision making and that isn't what I have as Mr. Malabatsi's statement.
We'll certainly do.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
I just want to see if I understand. Who took the decision to sign the subscription? Is it Mlibatsi or is it you?
Commissioner, the decision to sign was that of Mr. Mlibatsi as executive head of the department at that time. He came to me and said, there's pressure, what do we do about this? I said to him, you've done all the work, so what is the problem? We can sign. Because he has signing authorities. Then he signed and said to him, I will co-sign with you to demonstrate that I support you. As the head, as the chairperson of PMC, we will ratify this action at the next committee. That's what happened. He is the one who signed and I co-signed with him because he was the acting executive head at that point.
And then you can assume that that he actually had seen or the final PLS because the form comes from the PLS.
That's exactly what I assume has happened because my understanding is that you can't sign on the draft PLS.
Yes,
the form has to come with the final PLS.
Yes, exactly, because I was telling Judge that the the form, you actually rip it off from the PLS, and that comes from there, you know.
That's correct.
Okay.
Just for clarity purposes, Commissioners, the internal audit report confirms that the final PLS was received by the PIC on the 14th.
And then the question is, was that conveyed to Dr. Machila that you were basing the decision of signing on the final PLS? Because you signed on the 13th.
No, we signed on the 14th, Commissioner.
You've signed on the 14th.
Yes, the PLS was signed on the 14th, I remember.
If I go back to Mr. Malabatsi's statement, which is page 12, paragraph 35, he covers his interactions with you. And in 35.3, he says that due to the closing date of the private placement being on the 15th of December, he is instructing that the subscription form be signed. In other words, he asked me to sign as executive head listed PP for Fidelis, as he will sign the approver, as the approver of the transaction. And this would have been said on the afternoon of the 13th of December. Stated that PMC will be asked to ratify the transaction at the next sitting, and that as CEO and Chairman of PMC, he confirms that ratification can be done. So this discussion took place on the 13th.
On the 13th.
On the 13th.
Yeah. But if I remember well, the signing was the next day once the PLS was received.
These reports, what he says in 36.2, the reason IPP signed for ANC irrevocable, IPP signed the IO irrevocable subscription form is that he had reviewed the reports by Victor, that the due diligence report from risk, legal, and ESG had been initiated and were close to completion, and were subsequently, shortly thereafter, 14th or 15th of December, without recommendations that would have precluded the transaction from going ahead. It confirms what they had said to you. However, these reports were submitted after the irrevocable subscription form was signed. So you had the verbal agreement, not the written. And in discussion with the CEO, you provided reassurance, firstly, that as chairman of the PMC and CEO of the firm, you can provide guidance on what needed to be done to meet the IPO deadline. He said, you seemed very confident that there's nothing untoward in the signing of the subscription form if we were to take it to the PMC for ratification. I was clear in my mind that I could not sign the form in my capacity as the general manager, given the level of responsibility of that role. So there is some question about the signing and his comfort with that, according to Mr. Malabatsi, reassured by you that you'd had the conversations with risk, with legal, there were no material matters, and that it would be a due process to go to the next PMC and have the decision ratified. Is that correct?
Yes, and he's acting as the executive head of listed investment.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he derives his powers there.
Okay, thank you.
Just so that you're aware, Madam Commissioner, the internal audit report also says that the subscription form was signed on the 14th. So the PLS and the PLS is received on the 14th, and the subscription form is also signed on the 14th of December 2017.
Are you able to give us a page and paragraph?
It is at page 67, paragraph 10.4.18. But in fact, there is even the imaging of an email, Mr. Commissioner, which I've been struggling to find, which in fact images the email which was sent to the PIC containing the final PLS. And I just I haven't been able to find that email, that particular paragraph. But it does say that it was signed on the, received on the 14th. So I think, Dr. Majele, let's just run through what happened again on the 14th so that we are clear. You signed on the 14th and the PLS arrived on the 14th, but how did the subscription form then come to be signed? On the 14th of December.
Commissioner, you mean approached by Mr. Mulibatsi?
Yes, just detail for us the events so that we can all understand nicely what happened on the 14th of December that ended up in the subscription form being co-signed by yourself and Mr. Mulibatsi.
Commissioner, as I said, on the 14th, Mr. Mulibatsi was looking for me. We eventually met at the reception. He had the subscription form with him and completed a subscription form for that matter. It only required signatures. And he said to me, well, the subscription form is here. Tomorrow is the closing date. We can't find meetings. What do we do? Then I said to him, well, I think you can sign because all the work has been done. Valuation, ESG, there's nothing negative from what our colleagues have told us. Therefore, we can sign. And he said, well, he was uncomfortable, as he said. And then I said, well, as executive head, you can sign. You have that authority, and I'll co-sign with you. And I will make sure that we call a PMC meeting, as soon as it's possible to get ratification of this transaction.
Was there any discussion about whether the information from the draft PLS had differed in the final PLS?
No, there was nothing material. The only thing that would have changed would have been dates, of course, and the pricing was now fixed at 43 rents, I think.
And I want to ask you this, Dr. Machila, because this is important. He definitely had the subscription form in his hand, and he had already filled it out.
Yeah, it was already filled up. I think it must have been by Mr. Siani that reports to him, because he was working, intensely on this. So he approached me with a complete. All it needed was a signature.
Because the internal audit report suggests that the PLS was received after the final subscription form was signed by yourself and Mr. Mulibatsi. What do you say about that?
That can't be possible, because we would be signing a wrong document then.
I see.
Just for clarity, in terms of process, again, you consulted with the different ESG, risk and legal on the 13th?
That would have been.
And therefore their work will have been based on the draft PLS?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Then we got a little sidetracked, Dr. Majila. I was just asking you about the two outstanding risk considerations which were raised by this internal audit report. You've already commented on the one being the audited financial statements of IO. The other factor which is raised is the fact that the risk classified the transaction that the PIC was entering into as an underwriting of the private placement of AO, but in fact it was a subscription agreement, and that the risk report goes further to recommend a condition precedent that the PIC should receive a market-related fee for underwriting the private placement. This is page 17, paragraph 6.8.2, Commissioners of the Internal Audit Report.
The This is an IPO, and we've been asked to subscribe for 29%. We are not underwriting the full IPO, insofar as we understood it, Commissioner. So there was no need for underwriting fees under those circumstances.
Yeah.
The due diligence would have been the same for both.
Yeah. And can I just explain what we mean to underwrite? Because I understand when you underwrite, you actually also get paid a fee
That's
to
correct.
underwrite. Can
That's
you
correct.
explain to us what it means by underwriting and
Yeah,
what happens?
normally when you underwrite, you'd be underwriting a bigger amount and basically taking the risk that some investors will not honor, and therefore you are able to cover and ensure that the listing meet the requirements of the JSE, in other words, the minimum amount that is required. For that, you get paid a fee, which is the underwriting fee. So in this instance, this was not an underwriting fee, but was just a normal subscription.
Just a subscription?
Exactly.
Okay. All right. 6.8.2 is not right.
It's not right. It's not right. And the nature of the due diligence is not dependent on whether you are underwriting or you are subscribing for shares or in a private placement.
Okay.
So it's the same due diligence for both.
It would be the same due diligence.
Whilst you're looking at that, Mr. Rulo, sir, I don't remember whether or not I told you this morning that we will break at 3:30.
You didn't, Mr. Commissioner, but my learned friends informed me of that.
My apologies. I was supposed to have conveyed that to you.
We don't have a difficulty, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you. Then, Doctor, can I ask you to continue then from paragraph 442?
My understanding of my role as a Chief Executive Officer is to manage the day-to-day operations of the PIC in terms of the powers delegated to me by the board in terms of Section 5 of the PIC Delegation of Authority dated April 2015. It's Annexure DD 14. In terms of this delegation, I'm assisted by the Executive Committee, a committee that is also has investment subcommittees, PMC listed and PMC unlisted, and other committees. Section 517 of the Delegation of Authority, Annexure DD 14, stipulates that, I quote, the CEO has the day-to-day responsibility of managing the business activities pertaining to third-party funds. The day-to-day business of the PIC is to perform, in terms of its various client mandates, an integral part of which is making investments on behalf of clients. My understanding was that I could invoke my executive powers in instances where the formal PIC investment processes for approval of the transaction could not take place timelessly, as was the case in IO, where PMC could not be convened to approve the transaction in time to meet the subscription deadline. The PMC could then ratify my actions, providing, of course, that they were consistent with the recommendations of the investment team as to the conclusion of the transactions. Deviations
just to clarify something here quickly. In terms of the EXCO, do you decide by consensus or do you debate and all that? And if as a CEO you are not happy, can you take the final decision in the sense that I've listened to you guys, but this is my decision?
No, that never happens. As we've explained, there's very little instances, I can't even remember situations where the recommendations from the technical teams are turned around, are not accepted, you know. So when there is an agreement between the technical team being happy with the pricing and the technical aspects of the deal, potential returns, and the legal team also being happy with legal risk around the transaction, the risk also being comfortable with the risks associated with the transaction, and most importantly, ESG, being happy that even when certain ESG aspects are not met, but they raise them and they are happy to engage going forward or make use of that as an engagement plan with the company to fix ESG going forward, that then the transaction has a 99% of passing. And most of the time, I can't remember once where we vote for a transaction. It's always about discussion, and then we reach consensus.
Yes, I was more saying, like broadly, besides transactions, I mean, have you been to a point where, in terms of the terms of reference of EXCO, that you cannot reach consensus, or you still feel as a sort of as a CE that the right decision is yours? Have you said, look, I still think I'm right, EXCO is wrong?
No, that never happened.
Mm-hmm.
No. Mm-hmm. I think throughout my stay at PIC, I don't remember once making use of that power, veto power to get a transaction through or a decision through.
Thanks. So it's consensus race.
Yes.
Okay.
Where are we now? 444. Commissioner, I'm on 444. The deviations are common in any business environment where circumstances necessitate such. Ms. Murray, in her statement to this commission, corroborates this fact. She further makes an example of a deal that was concluded after I've left the PIC. My understanding of her statement is that the IC delegated to management the authority to conclude the transaction subject to satisfactory due diligence. Although this situation where a higher approving committee approved PMC1 in a way and delegates its powers to PMC2 or the same PMC to perform approval, full approval, to conclude an investment in an unlisted asset is unusual. It is by no means beyond the powers of the approving committee to authorize. The PMC can approve transaction of up to 500 million in the unlisted investments. I believe that part of the reason I was removed was to allow for this process to unfold in the EDCON deal. Another example was African Rainbow Capital Investment, where the private placement subscription form was nonetheless signed by the deal team, and the transaction concluded in circumstances where a condition precedent set by the PMC to the conclusion of the investment had not been met. The divestment memo is attached and marked DD 66. The issue of PMC approval was not raised by finance in that memo. The PMC nevertheless ratified the conclusion of the investment transaction, notwithstanding that the deal team had no authority to sign the private placement subscription form and conclude the deal because the conditions precedent had not been met. A copy of the relevant resolution dated 30 September is attached and marked DD 67. These are not the only examples. The PMC has often ratified investment transactions after their conclusion by employees with even less authority than me. This pertains to, among others, rights issues and portfolio rebalancing. Some of these deals are Sanlam, Clicks, Vukile, Sibanye, Baldwin IPO that listed in July 2016. Section 6.2 of the Delegation of Authority Listed Investment, a copy of which is attached and marked DD 14.1, gives the PMC authority to approve transactions of 3 billion but less than 10 billion in the listed space. This authority is exercised through the PMC either by way of meeting or by way of round robin, if we are able to meet. Remember that by the time the meeting or round robin, the deal will already have been initiated by the deal team. And as a result of the due diligence process, reports by, among others, executive head of risk, legal, indicating their own agreement with the proposed transaction by either recommending or not recommending it, it would have been tabled or available.
Dr. Majela, if I can just stop you here, there's something that I want to put to you, which is what the GPF said when they gave evidence before the Commission, is that the AO transaction, or the conclusion, the proposed conclusion of the AO transaction was not disclosed to them, and they felt that it should have been. What is your comment on that?
The AO transaction is an IPO, and it's in line with the listed investments of listed mandate investment for the GPF, which is a discretionary mandate. And there is no limit insofar as the listed investments are concerned from the GPF. There's no mandate restriction from the GPF insofar as listed investments are concerned, including IPOs. Can I proceed?
So in your view, is there any validity to the complaint that the GPF ought to have first been informed of this transaction and have given its approval for it to proceed?
I think from what I understood, they classified this transaction as a structured investment product, which is not true. It's not a structured investment product. It's a initial public offering. It's a transaction where a company is going to list on the JSE immediately after subscription. So it cannot be a structured investment product. So it did not need to be approved by the GPF.
Please proceed.
Sorry, just on that question, I think there's a distinction. I think that was what the comment of Mr. Sotole when he was here, to the effect that you may have the mandate. That's not what was questioned. It was a question of disclosure, especially if I recall correctly, their concerns about the investment in the independent media, as Sekunjalo, to say it would have been good for there to be a disclosure of that to them, that this is what has happened. So it wasn't that they needed a prior approval, it's just that in the communication, as I recall Mr. Sotole's evidence, was that he was concerned that there had been no disclosure prior or subsequent. I didn't think he was questioning that you had violated the mandate.
Okay. I'm now on 448. In a PMC meeting, in addition to this executive head or representative, the CFO or her representative will also be present, and after discussions of the transaction, those present, including the CFO, will be asked whether they agreed that the transaction be concluded. The agreement by the executive head at the meeting was simply confirmation of the agreement in their reports. In general, I have strived to obtain unanimous consensus for the conclusion of a proposed transaction from those present, even if their agreement was not strictly required for that purpose by the DOA listed investments. As part of that process, the CFO as her representative and I as the CEO will also indicate our agreement for the conclusion of the transaction, And it was after that process that the PMC would finally approve the conclusion of the transaction. That is the process.
Would that be a convenient place to call it a day?
I think so, Mr. Commissioner.
Can I just confirm that tomorrow morning it will be Ms. Marcus and myself, and Mr. Ladiga won't be here?
It is noted, Mr. Commissioner.
All right, we shall then adjourn until tomorrow morning at 9:30.